On Christmas Eve 2002 in Modesto, California, police received a call to report a missing woman. The woman's stepfather was calling in and he relayed to the dispatcher that she was 8 months pregnant and that morning she had left to go take her dog for a walk in the park and had never returned. Since then, the dog had returned home with the leash still attached to the collar, but no one had seen his stepdaughter. 4 months later, the answer to where this woman was would wash up on the shore of the San Francisco Bay. That same day, her killer was arrested, and 1 year later, he was sentenced to death. But he would eventually manage to get his sentence overturned in the fight for his life to prove his innocence. This is the story of Laci Peterson. Hi, my name is Tasha and this is my series White Rabbit, where we deep dive into anything spooky, odd, or just interesting while I apply some special effects makeup. Today's story is terrible, honestly, and it's super unfortunate that people like this exist. If you have not heard about Laci Peterson's story, I do want to put a trigger warning right here, just because I try not to get super gruesome on my page, but it's hard to avoid with this story. Honestly, it's just pretty gruesome. So if you are sensitive to things like harm to an unborn child, you might want to just sit this one out, skate right on past this. So for today's makeup, I will be turning myself into a spider because somebody in today's story has the personality of a venomous bug, and I'll let you decide who. So I saw a couple of variations on this look and it looked relatively easy. And then when I tried to do it, I quickly realized that it is not easy like most of the looks that I try. Which makes sense. I have no training. Everything I do is a learning experience on this channel. I started this YouTube channel as a way to make me practice my special effects makeup. I actually had no comprehension of how difficult it actually was, and I went out and I spent hundreds of dollars on supplies and I was not practicing. So when I started my YouTube channel, I was like, this is going to be the thing that puts the pressure on me to practice, and it's working. I get so much practice in, but like this spider, everything is more difficult than it looks like. If you know any tips, tricks, or channels that I should be watching, feel free to mention it in the comment section. Everything I'm using to make today's video possible will be linked below. Please remember to like, comment, and subscribe if you indeed want to see more of me. It lets the algorithm know that we are in love.
We are very much in love.
Wait, let's give an update because I haven't given an update in a while. 629, that's where we're at right now. The last time I remember like stating a goal, I think it was like 400. So we've passed that. I don't even know if I said anything. So thank you, everyone. I love every single one of you. Thank you for being here. My goal for this year is to get to 1,000. Enough of all that. Now we're going to jump into the story. And as always, we are going to start at the very beginning. Laci Denise Rocha was born May 4th, 1975 in Modesto, California. Laci was described as happy since birth, basically. Her mom shared this cute little story about how she would always try to sneak into Laci's room when she was a baby to wake her up in the morning. But every single day, no matter how early she got up, by the time she made it into the room, Laci was just staring at her wide-eyed, smiling like, let's get the day started. That outgoing personality followed her through her childhood years and into her teenage years. Laci was fun and free and friendly. She was that popular girl that everybody wanted to be friends with because being popular didn't change her personality. She was still incredibly sweet and warm, just a great girl. Laci met Scott when they were both attending California Polytechnic State University, also known as Cal Poly. Scott was working at this cafe called Pacific Cafe, and Laci went in one time and thought he was really cute, so she just kept finding reasons and excuses to always go back to that cafe. And I think she ended up sliding him her number on a napkin, but That's how they met, and sparks eventually did start to fly. Scott was described as a bit of a show-off. He loved to spend money on Laci. He loved to buy her flowers and gifts. When they first started dating, he took her on this expensive trip to Mexico and just lavished her with gifts. Some might call it love bombing, but Laci felt a connection with him anyway, so all of these beautiful extra things that he was doing just made it easier for her to fall in love with him. Laci and Scott got married August 9th, 1997, and then they moved back to Laci's hometown of Modesto. Now, according to all of their family and friends, Scott and Laci seemed really happy. They were definitely that couple that hosted events all of the time. They had pool parties and they hosted showings of The Sopranos. Never seen The Sopranos, but I've heard great things. Overall, people just said that they were very in love. There was one point of contention between Scott and Laci, and it's a very important one, and that was children. Laci longed to be a mother. She wanted to have children so bad, and it was clear to everyone. She would ask all of her friends about their pregnancies and what it was like. She openly longed to add children to her family, and Scott openly did the polar opposite. He did not want children. He made it very clear to Laci that he didn't want children. I don't know if they talked about this before marriage. Like, did he say he wanted children and then change his mind? Or did he always say that he didn't want children and Laci thought maybe she could change his mind? I don't know, but that seems like such a serious issue that it's crazy to me that it was never brought up before. I don't know. According to Laci's mother, Laci called her one day just crying, just completely devastated because she was talking to Scott and he basically would not budge on having children. He was so firm that he didn't want any and he wasn't going to change his mind, and she was devastated. It's hard for me to believe that he made it very clear that he never wanted children while they were dating, because it was so important to her. I just see that as possibly a deal breaker in the very beginning if he would have told her that. So I don't know, I guess I'm all in their business. Well, none of that ended up mattering, because about 6 months after he shattered her dreams, Scott changed his mind. So Laci went from telling her friends that Scott didn't want children and she would never be a mom, to telling her friends that her and Scott were actively trying to get pregnant. Nobody understood why he changed his mind, but for the most part, they were just happy for Laci because they knew it was something that was really important to her. But it was strange that he was so firm on not having children only 6 months later to change his mind. I don't know, suspicious. Laci found out that she was going to be a mom in June of 2002, and she was so excited. This was her dream come true, and Laci was one of those women that loved every single moment of being pregnant. She would journal about all of her doctor's appointments and how the baby was growing and just how excited she was for all these new changes that were about to come. Laci was fully embracing this new life. Scott, on the other hand, was not embracing the pregnancy at all. In one of Laci's journal entries, she wrote about being so excited that Scott was going to be here for the sonogram because this was such a beautiful moment and she felt like she should be experiencing that with him. Well, when they got there, Scott was not excited at all. He wasn't into it. He just didn't seem to care. And Laci kept telling herself that deep down inside, he really did care. He just wasn't showing it. And you can tell that he wasn't excited because not just with this specific appointment, the way that he was acting, but the way that Scott was acting through Laci's entire pregnancy. She was basically doing this all alone. He was never there. He was traveling more than ever before. He spent no time with her. And when he was there, like for the sonogram appointment, he was so disinterested. He was very distant, not there at all. For example, Laci Laci and Scott every single year would host this annual Christmas party. I think they had done it for like 5 years. It was very important to Laci. She loved it. People looked forward to this Christmas party because Laci would go all out. She would spend so much money and so much time decorating the house for all of their guests. But Christmas 2003 was different for Laci. Scott was never home and he wasn't going to be home anytime to be able to do this Christmas party. Laci was 8 months pregnant. She was all alone. It was just too much work for her to be able to put the show on that she usually put on. It just wouldn't have been the same. And also Scott wasn't there, so she would have been by herself anyway. It's just not the same vibe. One of their close friends actually stepped in to host the Christmas party that year. And that year there was this terrible storm and nobody really expected to see Laci because of how bad the storm was. But she arrived drenched and looking sad and just beaten down, not at all like herself. Not only was she not looking like herself, she wasn't really acting like herself. Laci sat alone in the corner for much of the time and she didn't interact that much with her friends, and that was not at all like Laci. She was always so energetic in the life of the party and everyone could just tell that she was so sad. And unfortunately, this would be the last experience that they had with Laci. The last time they saw her, she was beaten down and sad. December 24th, 2002. So this is Christmas Eve. Scott Peterson makes a phone call to Laci's mother and he asks her, "Hey, is Laci over there?" When she replied no, he then said, "Well, she's missing then." She told Scott, "Okay, you need to call every single one of her friends, make sure that no one has seen her." He did that and he ended up calling her back and saying, no one's seen her. That was when Laci's stepfather stepped in and made that call to police to report Laci missing. He told the dispatcher that Laci had been missing since that morning when she went to walk her dog at the park. The dog came back with the collar and leash still attached, but there was no Laci. Now her stepfather is delivering this secondhand information. I'm not sure why Scott didn't call since he was actually the one experiencing it. I mean, he knew what Laci was doing that morning. I don't know. I guess it just seems weird to me that he wouldn't be the one calling. Everyone was in a panic immediately. The police were out searching, knocking on doors, asking questions. I mean, Laci was 8 months pregnant. She's not voluntarily going anywhere. All of Laci's friends came out and they were making flyers and hanging them up around the neighborhood. Laci's mother even went to the park and she was searching the park by herself. The media was called, and that same night that Laci went missing, her face was plastered all across the news asking anyone for help and for information as to where Laci was. Detective Al Brocchini was assigned to the case, and when he arrived, there was more chaos than he had ever seen with any case. All of the neighbors were outside. There were cameras, there were lights because by this time it was night. There was even a helicopter flying overhead. It was just immediately obvious that this case was going to be very big. And for all the media and attention and lights and cameras that were surrounding the area, one thing that Brocchini noticed as odd was in the midst of all this, Scott Peterson was very strangely, eerily calm. I don't know if it's Brocchini or Brocchini. I think it's Brocchini. I think it's Brocchini. One example that Detective Brocchini gave of this was that Scott immediately started calling him by his first name, which was weird to him. It wasn't like an immediate red flag, but most people in that situation keep a very professional tone and they will call him Detective or Detective Brocchini. Scott would just be like, "What's going on, Al? How's it doing, Al? It's suspicious. Scott let the police inside to do a search of the house. They didn't find anything disturbed. They did find Laci's purse still hanging in the closet with all of her identification, all of her money inside. They also did a search of the two vehicles where Detective Brocchini noticed inside of Scott's truck, well, in the back of Scott's truck, there were really big pool umbrellas and there was this big blue tarp. Scott told investigators that he had been out fishing at the marina when Laci went missing, and he provided his parking ticket stub for where he would launch his boat to them. He also gave them a bag that had his fishing license and some lures inside that he said he bought and used. And then Scott makes this offhanded comment about how he was using the silver fishing lure, but then detectives looked in the bag and the silver fishing lure was still in the packaging. It wasn't even opened. So obviously that's suspicious. Investigators found that interesting. Scott was a fertilizer salesman and he had this shop slash like warehouse space where he would store his fertilizer, and he also worked out of there. So Detective Brocchini asked him if he could take him to his shop and let him look around, snap some pictures, and Scott agreed. After the search of his shop, Scott was then taken in for a formal interview. Okay, so I want to go over that day's events, like the timeline according to Scott, and I'll also interject some of investigators' timeline too. According to Scott, he woke up at around 8 a.m. that morning. Laci was already awake. Apparently, she would get up really early and eat because if not, her morning sickness would be just terrible. So after she got up, Scott lounged around for a little bit and then he joined her. When Scott finally joined Laci, she was just doing some household cleaning. He said that they watched Martha Stewart for a while, and then after that, Laci said that she was going to take their dog for a walk. We know that Martha Stewart aired between 9 and 10. So Laci says she's going to walk the dog and then she'll probably do some grocery shopping when she gets back. Originally, Scott planned to go golfing, but once he got outside, he said that it was too cold to go golfing, so he decided to go fishing. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but if it's too cold to go golfing, wouldn't it be too cold to go fishing because you're sitting right on water? Wouldn't it be colder going fishing than golfing? Either way, that was his thought plan. That was the path his mind went down. Now, according to Scott's attorney, between 9:20 and 9:40, one of Scott's neighbors saw him packing up the umbrellas into his truck. She waved him off and he headed off to his warehouse. At 10:18, the Petersons' neighbor, Karen Service, found their dog Mackenzie roaming the neighborhood with the leash still attached, and she just put the dog inside the gate and pulled the gate closed. Okay, I'm not judging Karen, but would you guys think that that was weird? I think that if my neighbor, who is 8 months pregnant, now go with me here, Laci's 8 months pregnant, Scott is never there, so technically Laci is the only one who ever takes care of the dog and walks the dog. So I assume the neighbors would always see Laci walking the dog. So if you see the dog with the leash, I'm not judging what the neighbor did. I'm just saying that like reads very weird for me, and maybe it's because I consume endless true crime that it seems weird. Maybe like the normal average person wouldn't think that it was weird. Maybe I'm the weird one. Anyway, that was at 10:18. Between 10:30 and 10:56, Scott can be seen logged into his work computer, and he was just working, sending emails, doing orders, things like that. But he's confirmed to be on his computer during that time. After that, Scott said he headed straight to the marina to go fishing, and his parking ticket was stamped at 12:54, and he was out on the water until 2 o'clock. At 2:15, Scott left a voicemail to Laci, and he was basically saying that he stayed out fishing too long, and I think he was supposed to run to her parents' farm to pick something up, and he needed her to do it now because he stayed out fishing too long. So now his 8-month pregnant wife needs to go run the errand that he knew he needed to do before he even went fishing. but that's what happened. 4:30 p.m. Scott made it back to his warehouse where he dropped off his boat, and he headed straight home after that since he was already late. When Scott made it home, he stated that the door was unlocked, the dog was already in the backyard with the leash and collar still attached, and Laci was nowhere to be found. Assuming Laci was just at her mom's, Scott took his clothes off, threw them in the washer, grabbed some pizza, and then took a shower. When he got out of the shower and Laci still wasn't there, it was about 5:17 p.m. That was when he called her mom asking if Laci was over there. Detective Brocchini asked Scott if he would be willing to take a polygraph test just so that he could clear him. And initially he did agree, but he changed his mind, and of course that will always pique investigators' interest. From investigators' point of view, they feel like your wife is missing. You should want to do everything in your power to cooperate, clear yourself so that they could use those resources and direct them somewhere else. But from Scott's point of view, his father advised him. I'm not sure where his lawyer stood on this, but his father for sure advised him. He told him, get a lawyer, do not take a polygraph test, because if you take a polygraph test and you're telling the truth, they won't say anything about it. But if there's something sketchy going on, if you fail, if even it's the slightest inconsistency, he felt like they would use that to basically nail Scott for the crime. So then Scott all of a sudden was too scared to do the polygraph and he declined. During the early stages of the investigation, it was very quickly noticed that Scott was acting kind of strange. I'll say his behavior was questionable. His behavior was questionable. Investigators found it very odd how relaxed Scott was during this whole thing. He was extremely relaxed during the search efforts when everybody was looking for Laci. Initially that first day when everyone arrived, he was so calm and everyone else was super frantic. So that was strange. And then I told you he kept calling Detective Brocchini Al, like he was just so comfortable with that. And to top all that off, when he was taken down to do his formal interview, he was so relaxed and just like chill. It's just not the type of reaction you would expect from a person whose pregnant wife was missing. It doesn't say he's guilty, but it was just strange. Why is he so calm? So the police weren't entirely trusting Scott's story. Also, the media wasn't entirely trusting Scott's story because he was being very avoidant of them at the time. And of course, everyone expects the husband of a missing woman to do everything in their power to get her name out. But Scott was being very avoidant of the media, and even things that he was supposed to do, appearances that he was supposed to make, he would call up Laci's friends and tell them to do it instead. He just did not want to be on camera. You could say that maybe Scott was having a really hard time and so he didn't want to deal with the media. But according to Laci's friends, Scott did not seem to be having a very hard time. He was even caught cracking jokes during the searches. Maybe he was just trying to lighten the mood, but it was just in very bad taste, and some of her friends did notice, especially in hindsight, that that was a strange thing to do. Scott was also becoming very avoidant of the family, which was starting to rub them the wrong way. Every time they called him, every time they needed him, he was always busy doing something, but he was never really helping with the search. There was just always a reason why he couldn't show up, or he didn't show up, or he had to send somebody else to take care of what was his responsibility. December 26th, police show up to Scott and Laci's home, and they asked Scott if he would voluntarily let them search the home again. He declined, and they responded by getting a search warrant and searching the house anyway. I'm pretty sure they already had the search warrant in the works, but they just wanted to see what his response would be to them asking to search the house. Investigators spent 2 days going through every single thing in the house with a fine-tooth comb. They even brought in someone named Sharon Hagan, and she was with the Violent Profiling Unit. She was a specialist and she was there to bring some focus to the investigation. What grabbed Sharon's attention was Scott's boat in the warehouse. So investigators started to dig deeper into Scott's boat and this fishing story, and they learned a lot. First, they find out that Scott just got this boat. In fact, this boat was so new that the day of Laci's disappearance was the first day that that boat had ever been out on the water. He purchased the boat December 9th, so like 15 days before Laci's disappearance, and he told no one. No one knew that he had a boat. This man had a wife, a baby on the way. It was 2 weeks before Christmas, and he bought himself a boat. Scott obtained his fishing license December 20th, 4 days before Laci went missing. And to top all of this off, the day before Scott bought his boat, he was researching the tides. Not fishing spots, not lures, not anything else other than tides. So investigators get a little suspicious and they start thinking, they're like, wait a minute. The marina is 90 miles away. You mean to tell me Scott drove 90 miles one way and put this boat on the water for the first time ever on Christmas Eve, knowing that he was supposed to run an errand with Laci's parents or stop by the farm? It seemed like a bit much to be doing. Like it didn't really make sense. You're doing all of this on Christmas Eve while you're telling your wife to go run the errands that you didn't do because you wanted to drive 90 miles to go on a fishing trip. So police end up hearing through the grapevine from some workers that worked inside of that same warehouse space that Scott had. Someone told police that Scott was making homemade anchors there. So police ask Scott about this and he tells them yes, he made one homemade bucket anchor. So it looked like a bucket and it had like a loop on top that you could thread the rope through, but there was no rope. So investigators are like, how did you take the anchors out on the boat with you? Like, how did you use this anchor without rope? But Scott didn't have an explanation. He was like, I don't have rope. Okay. Not only was there no rope, but also Scott took investigators where he made these cement anchors, and you could clearly see that he made two of them. There are two clear indentions that perfectly fit those homemade cement bucket anchors. And Scott's like, I see what you're saying, but I'm telling you I only made one. It's the one on the boat that I used with no rope. I just wonder if he ever gave them an explanation. Like if anyone sat and asked him, how did you retrieve the anchor with no rope after you used it? Because I didn't see an answer for that. Inside Scott's boat, along with the one remaining anchor, the police take into evidence some needle nose pliers with a long strand of dark colored hair wrapped around it. Now, with this evidence that's starting to pop up and kind of point a little bit towards Scott, there actually was an incident that happened that led away from Scott. On December 26th, the Petersons' neighbors, their names were the Medinas, they returned home from a vacation. They were gone several days and they found out that their home had been burglarized. Now, when police were investigating this burglary based on eyewitnesses, some neighbors that had seen some sketchy men parked out front in a van, it was theorized that this burglary happened the exact same day that Laci went missing. And the Medinas lived directly across the street from the Petersons. So this gets some people to thinking that maybe they're related. Investigators were tipped off to two men involved in the robbery. Stephen Todd and Glenn Pierce were arrested and charged with the burglary of the Medina home, but within 24 hours they were cleared of any connection to the disappearance of Laci Peterson. It was uncovered that the burglary actually took place on December 26th. Okay, so there's a little bit of contention with this. Some people say that it's not possible that this burglary happened on the 26th because on the 26th, media was flooded through the streets like on the Peterson house all the time, and there was no way that a burglary was taking place at that time. But according to the criminals themselves and also police, that this is indeed when it happened. It did not happen on the 24th. The two guys that got convicted of the burglary, they even said that they noticed that there was like a lot of media there, but I guess they did it anyway. So yeah, they didn't have anything to do with Laci's disappearance. Because this case had basically taken over the media, the tips to the Modesto Police Department were flooding in. I mean, like flooding, pouring in. There were so many tips pouring in that they ended up setting up a specific team that would handle only tips for this case. And there were, I think it was like 4,000 tips. They would receive the calls, they would ask questions, they would log everything into a database, and then the detectives would later be able to go back and kind of sift through, and I don't know how they determine what's like important though, but they do that. Okay, on day 6 of the investigation, a woman that was working the tip lines received a tip from a woman claiming to be Scott Peterson's girlfriend, and she said that they had been dating for quite a few months. So the woman working the tip line, her name was Bev. Bev is just like typing away, entering all of this into the database. Well, Detective Brocchini, he was there that day and he was walking behind her, and he just so happened to see what she was typing up. So he's like, wait a minute, is that woman still on the line? And Bev is like, yeah, she's still here. He asked to speak to her, and that is the moment that everyone finds out about Amber Frey. So who is Amber Frey? Amber Frey was a single mom from Rolling Hills, California. In November of 2002, one of Amber's really close friends wanted to introduce her to this guy. She said he was handsome, he was smart, he was successful, and most of all, he was really looking for the one. And that piqued Amber's interest because Amber had a daughter and she really did want that family dynamic for her daughter. So Amber Frey met up with, you guessed it, Scott Peterson. And Scott appeared to Amber to be everything that her friend said he was. He was funny, he was smart, and they instantly just clicked. They started dating pretty soon. Scott told Amber that he had never been married and that he did not have any children. He also told her that he did not want any children and that her daughter would be enough for him. This was actually one of the reasons that Amber said she started to fall for Scott, because of how great he treated her daughter. That kind of makes me want to throw up, honestly. So everything was going smoothly between Amber and Scott until it wasn't. So one of Amber's really good friends just happened to run into this guy that worked with Scott. So when they figured out they knew the same person, they kind of chit-chatted about him a little bit, and this guy casually brings up the fact that Scott is a married man. So her friend is pissed and she calls Scott and basically tells Scott, she gives him an ultimatum, either you tell Amber or I will. So Scott was pretty much screwed. He had to fess up, or he kind of fessed up. Not really. On December 9th, Scott calls Amber and he tells her that he really needs to talk to her. It's very important. So he goes over to her house, and as soon as he shows up, he is in shambles. He looks like he has been crying for hours. He is barely talking, and he tells Amber that he is so sorry, but he has to admit that he lied to her. He told Amber that he lied about not being married. He was married, but he had actually lost his wife, and this would be his first holiday season without her. And after that, Scott just breaks into tears and he is sobbing. At this point, Amber is comforting him, and she was just afraid to even ask any questions because he was not holding it together. This did not look like a man that could survive any type of interrogation. I'd have asked anyway. Okay, suck up those tears. Now what do you mean lost your wife? Amber wanted to ask questions, honestly. She really did, but she just felt, honestly, she just fell for Scott's manipulation in that moment, and she ended up comforting him, as I said, instead of questioning him. So he got what he wanted. After that, Amber pretty much avoided the situation, or the subject, I should say, and she just felt like, okay, when he's ready to talk to me, he'll talk to me about it. So all is forgiven. They go back to dating. Everything is normal. Everything is going smoothly again, until it isn't. Because 2 weeks after that, another one of Amber's friends sends her an article about the missing Laci Peterson. As soon as Amber saw those articles, she picked up her phone and she called the tip line for Laci. The most alarming thing, in my opinion, that Amber shared was when she said that Scott told her that he had lost his wife on the 9th, which was the same day that he bought that boat, but Laci didn't go missing until the 24th. Amber shared a lot of things that disgusted a lot of people with Scott. Like that Christmas party, for example. The one that Laci drove to in the storm by herself and sat in the corner kind of sulking the whole night. That Christmas party. Well, Amber has a picture of her and Scott from that same night, and they were at a Christmas party together. His pregnant wife was at a Christmas party alone, miserable, and he was at a Christmas party with another woman. I had the nerve to take pictures together like he was actually single. He had no fear. Amber made it very clear to detectives that she was on Laci's side. She liked Scott, but she wasn't so into Scott that she could not see all of these things that were adding up against him. She was so much on Laci's side that she agreed to a phone tap, and she basically tried to get Scott to incriminate himself through all of these recordings. During this sneaky spy time, Amber found out what a liar Scott actually was. Scott had told Amber that he was celebrating New Year. He was bringing in the New Year in Paris. He even called her after midnight. He said he was right next to the Eiffel Tower. Everything was beautiful, yada, yada, yada. Well, Amber knew, she had from very trusted sources, she's working with the police. Amber knew that Scott was at a vigil for Laci. He called her from the vigil, a candlelight vigil, and you're calling your mistress. The disrespect. January 3rd, 2003, Scott Peterson is called in for another interview. At this point, investigators have nothing on him other than like a gut feeling and the fact that he intentionally misleads the police at times. So they just want to like rile him up a little bit. They sit down and investigators slide over a black and white photocopy of that picture of him and Amber at the Christmas party. Scott calmly looks at the picture, picks it up, and the investigator is like, "Do you want to explain that?" And he looks at him and says, "You don't think that's me, do you?" It is very clearly him, but a liar is gonna lie if they don't do nothing else. So after being shown this picture, it's obvious to Scott that he has to tell Amber. Like, this case is already huge. He thinks it's a miracle that she doesn't know about this case, even though she does. But he thinks it's a miracle that she doesn't know about this case, but he knows once the media gets hold of this picture, Amber's gonna find out because they're camped out in his yard. She's gonna find out. So he calls her a few days after meeting with the investigators, and he tells her that he lied. He was still technically married, but that his wife was missing. He lied about traveling and being in Paris. He was actually in Modesto with Laci's family searching. He had to come out with everything. Well, most things. Amber finally got her chance to confront Scott, and she didn't have to put on this fake facade and pretend that everything was okay and their relationship was the same when she knew in her heart everything that was going on. She could drop all of that and just really be honest with him. Of course, Scott started crying and asking Amber, "Do you really believe I could do something so evil? How could you believe this about me?" But at that point, she was immune to his manipulation. She knew the type of person he was, so she didn't accept any of that. Good for her. At this point, police knew that Laci wasn't coming home. They knew that they were searching for a body. I mean, Scott bought a boat the same day that he told Amber he had lost his wife. He had a parking receipt for the marina. He had been researching tides. There were those pliers with the single black hair wrapped around them that was found in his boat. The missing homemade cement anchor. I almost forgot about that. But because of all of these things, investigators felt like Laci's body was in the bay. The day the search of the bay was held was actually the day that was supposed to be Laci's baby shower. But instead of celebrating with her family and friends the joy of bringing this new baby into the world, they were launching boats off of different points of the bay in search of her body. And do you know what Scott was doing? He was sneaking up to the bay and trying to watch what they were doing from like kind of like set off in some little bushes, but they were watching him watch them, and there was a GPS tracker on his truck so they knew where he was. The day they searched the bay, he came back 5 different times to watch them. They didn't find Laci that day, but the way Scott was acting basically confirmed to them that they were on the right track. To the shock of no one, definitely not me, the photo of Amber and Scott got leaked to the media, the Inquirer to be exact, and now Amber was thrust into this spotlight that she did not ask for. She literally showed up to work one day and media was everywhere. The only thing that police could think of to kind of regain some of her privacy, which it didn't really work, but they gave it their best shot. Police believed that maybe if they held a press conference where Amber could just give out information that she had, maybe the media would back off a little bit. On January 23rd, a press conference was held, and that is where Amber basically laid out all the facts about her relationship with Scott Peterson. Well, not all of the facts, but she basically let the media know she's not a mistress. She did not know that Scott Peterson was married. They did have a relationship, but he lied to her. She also made it clear that the most important thing to her was that Laci be returned safely. After the public found out about Amber, everyone turned on Scott. I mean, the community, Laci's parents turned on him. No one believed that he was innocent anymore. Soon, the very man that avoided the press at all costs, literally anything he could do to avoid the media, he would do. And now all of a sudden, Scott is like appearing on Good Morning America, trying to clear his name. He never wanted to do appearances for Laci, but when it comes to clearing his name, he'll do an appearance. This actually ended up being a terrible decision for him because during the entire interview, all he did was make himself seem more and more guilty. He outright lied and said that he had told investigators from day one about his affair with Amber, which no, he did not. Amber was the one that told investigators about their affair. And he also said, I would like to say he lied, but I can't prove that he was lying, but he said that he had told Laci about Amber and that Laci was cool with it. She wasn't even upset. She was like, yeah, okay. I know that I'm pregnant and we're married, but I'm fine with you having an affair. That's what he said, okay? I do not believe it. I think he's a liar. Diane Sawyer also called him out on it because she was like, it's unbelievable that your pregnant wife had no reaction and was just fine with you telling her that you were having an affair. But he swears that that's what happened. Diane Sawyer also brought up the fact that through their whole interview, he did not mention his son a single time, at which Scott paused extremely long, like maybe he realized he fucked up. And then he said, it's just too painful. And he proceeded to very obviously fake cry. Was not believable. This interview was received terribly, and so in response to that, Scott invites another reporter to his home. This was a local reporter. This interview made him look even worse, if you could believe that it's possible. It made him look even worse because when the interviewer asked him, what do you love about Laci? He paused so long, such a dramatic pause, and then he said, look at a picture of her and it pretty much sums it up. Honestly, this made me really sad because this is a person that she loved. Laci loved him. Everyone said that Laci was so in love with Scott. She was so devoted to him and she was so excited to be having this baby with him. And even when she is missing, her husband cannot even think of a thing that he loves about her. That's so sad. It makes me mad. Like, throw the whole man away. You can sum it up by looking at her photograph. On April 14th, 2003, a woman's torso had washed up the San Francisco Bay. Just the day before, a male human fetus had been found just a few miles away. The worst possible scenario had come true. Laci and her son, who she had named Connor, had been murdered. And although investigators technically needed to wait for forensics in order to undeniably say that this was Laci and Connor, They knew that it was Laci and Connor. The woman's body that washed up still had maternity clothes on, and her womb was empty, and a few miles away a male fetus washed ashore. They were putting the puzzle together. When Scott had his very first interview with the police, he told them that when he was in the marina, he boated out to a little island called Brooks Island, and that is the same area that Laci and Connor's bodies were found. So investigators immediately look on their GPS tracker to see where Scott is, where that truck is. But when they find the truck and they pull the truck over, they realize Scott is not in the truck. Someone else is driving. Scott was eventually located in San Diego at his sister's house. They found out because they had a wiretap on his phone. So immediately there were officers that went out to San Diego to keep an eye on Scott. He was only an hour from the border to Mexico, and they did not trust him. I do not blame them. April 18th, 2003, Scott is invited to go golfing with his dad and his brother. So he's on his way to go golfing, and investigators are following him. And they are following him deep. I mean, there's even a helicopter following him. And Scott decides that he's gonna shake all of these cars and he's gonna shake this helicopter and he's gonna make it golfing anyway. Which essentially, I don't want to classify it as a high-speed chase because the officers didn't have their lights on or anything. They weren't really chasing him. They were just trying to tail him, and Scott was making it super difficult. He even managed to lose the helicopter that was following him. But after spending like an hour trying to evade police, well, he thought that it was media that was following him, but it was actually the police. He said that he didn't want the media, well, because he was wiretapped. He called his brother and canceled and said that the last thing he wanted was for the media to get photos of him golfing. So after all that, he just ended up going back home. After Scott decided to just go back home, he actually got pulled over because it wasn't the media that was following him, it was police. So you kind of were evading police unknowingly, but still. So Scott gets pulled over and everything in his car is super weird and very interesting. Okay, he has a shovel, he has 5 cell phones, he has Viagra, he also has multiple credit cards, and he also had a grill and wrote. The most interesting thing that Scott had on him was his brother's ID, and he had actually dyed his hair this blondish orangish color to match the ID. He looked really different from himself, but we know what you were doing. When Scott was being transported back to Modesto, that's when he found out that the bodies that were pulled from the bay were of his wife and his child. He put his head down. He didn't say anything. The next thing that he did say on that trip was, "Where are we eating?" The detective told him, "I was thinking about In-N-Out." And Scott replied, "I'll take a double, cheese fries, and a vanilla shake." I have no words. Scott Peterson's trial began June 1st, 2004. And this definitely wasn't going to be a slam dunk trial because there was no DNA evidence actually linking Scott to the crime. This was a circumstantial case. When I was going over the evidence earlier that they had against Scott, I forgot to add in that he sold Laci's car and he also was trying to sell the house. So that's just more circumstantial evidence on top of everything else that I said. The trial was treated like a freak show in the media, especially once Amber Fry got up to testify and everyone got to hear all the details of their relationship. Not only did she talk about their relationship, she also had been recording him since she received that article from her friend about Laci, and all of those tapes were played in court. All of Scott's manipulations, all of his lies were played for everyone to hear and for Amber to relive. It came out in trial that when police executed that second warrant and they went into the house, Scott had thrown all of Laci's things just in a pile on the floor in Connor's room, and Connor's room had basically become like storage. There was no care given to anything, any of their things. It's like he just wanted to throw them all in one room, close that door, and pretend they never existed. And they showed pictures during the trial of what he did to their stuff and how disrespectful he treated their things. This was not a man in mourning, and most definitely wasn't a man waiting for them to come back. November 12th, 2004, The verdict was in, and Scott Peterson was found guilty of the murder of his wife, Laci Peterson, and their son, Connor. He was sentenced to death and sent off to San Quentin, where his family continues to this day to fight for his innocence. They really, truly believe that he had nothing to do with Laci's murder. I, for one thing, think that they are holding on to every possible random theory just so that they don't have to see what he actually did and who he actually is. Scott's death penalty case was eventually overturned and it was converted to life in prison. This case was like a knife in the gut at every turn when I was researching it. The saddest part for me was how in love Laci was with Scott. I don't think she saw this coming. Not until it was happening. I can't imagine the betrayal of knowing that your husband is doing this to you, and also knowing that you're pregnant and your baby probably won't survive. I think that it is so sad and so unfortunate that people like Laci meet people like Scott. If you made it this far, thank you so much for being here. If you liked the video, please give a thumbs up and remember to subscribe if you have not yet subscribed. I hope you find my spider makeup super creepy, but not half as creepy as Scott Peterson with that orange hair. That's overboard. I love you so much for being with me, and I will see you down another rabbit hole.